Many thanks everybody for joining today's session. My name is Frank Milani. I am the Director of Road Mapping with iNEMI, the International Electronics Manufacturing Initiative. And this session today is really focused in around a refresh in the strategy behind the iNEMI roadmap and what we are doing then to execute upon that strategy in terms of generating a new approach to technology road mapping. The session will last around about 35-40 minutes, so there will be time at the end for some discussion and questions. So if possible, if you could hold your comments and thoughts and questions until that point, that would be fantastic. Right, so let's start with the basic strategy, and we'll work through there, have a look at a demonstration of that, and then come back to what the plans are for 2022 and how you can get involved. But if you look at road mapping, technology road mapping that's done collaboratively across multiple companies, multiple institutions, there are a number of possible different audiences. But for the purposes here, the number one audience we are trying to reach are key decision makers who control R&D spend, whether that be for technology development or product development in companies, whether it be for grant aid money in research programs from government agencies or research directions in a university department. So it's those key decision makers we're trying to reach, and indeed the key technical staff, senior technical staff that advise those. Now, if you're trying to influence their decisions, you first have to go back and look at the basic format of the roadmap and consider just the iNEMI roadmap, which is not unusual. It's quite typical of many of the industry roadmaps. The 2019 roadmap shown in the photograph on the left weighs in at around about 1,400 pages, 22 chapters, each of which is about 80 to 120 pages in length. That's more than my copy of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, shown there as well in the same photograph for comparison purposes. So there's a fantastic amount of detail in that document. Great technology primer for subject matter experts, but it is just way too heavy, way too dense of a set of material to absorb, even take a single chapter, even to read one of those in a single sitting or multiple sittings. It's just too much. So we want to get to something which is more concise, something more like Wikipedia, for example, and that's just one example of a kind of format that we're trying to aim at. And the kind of things we're looking for here is something that is easily accessible online. It is short, concise. It has a common structure from article to article, from topic to topic. And it is something that is refreshed, easily updated, and therefore is always current in terms of the information that it presents. So that's the kind of format we're looking for, because we believe that's the kind of format that can be easily used by technology strategists and technology decision makers. So what I'm going to show you next is a demonstration of what that looks like in the context of the iNEMI roadmap. And our starting point, since we're into a new cycle here, is actually the old content from the 2019 roadmap. So what we took was one particular chapter from the 2019 roadmap on power conversion electronics. And what I have up here on screen is actually the old PDF document for that. This document was supplied to us very kindly by PSMA, the Power Source Manufacturers Association, and they built it off their own road mapping efforts. It is a 124-page document. It is well structured. It is a fantastic amount of detail in it. Structure-wise, it's built around the idea of applications, products, and then component technologies. So it's well designed from that point of view. Um, and it is a great primer if you want to get a sense of where the industry was at that point in time and where they felt it was heading towards. But it is 124 pages in length, not something you're going to absorb quickly if you have to try and do a comparison across multiple technologies, have some directions to figure out. Not the easiest to absorb. So what we did was we took this material and brought it across to an online platform. And that's where the demonstration lies. So let me show you that. So this platform here is a hosted commercial wiki from a company called Nuclino, or from a product called Nuclino. And essentially we absorbed the power conversion electronics material onto that platform. You can see here on the left-hand side the various headings. And then to the right, you have the various application segments. And the reason why I've material here for these application segments is because within that chapter, that power conversion electronics chapter, there were a number of market drivers identified, and many of which were generic. They weren't specific to the power conversion electronics fields, and those ones I pulled out and started to build up material in their own topics under the various application domains. But let's focus in for the moment on the left-hand side in the power conversion electronics space. And there you have, again, the same structure and organization that the PSMA chose for their roadmap chapter. We have the application segments, we have the product segments, components, and devices. And each of those breaks down into subtopics, right? So automotive, computing, communications, all the way down to IoT for the application segments. Product segments, then you have the AC/DC front-end power supplies, the external power supplies, all the way down to energy harvesting. And then, of course, there's material under the basic components and devices, technologies for power conversion, MOSFETs, IGBTs, and the newer stuff such as gallium nitride, silicon carbide, and so on. So all the material is brought across there. Now, to bring that all together, one of the things we pulled out of the original 2019 material is an overview article. Again, very much in that Wikipedia mode of looking at things. So we have an overview which threads the various bits of information together. This is about a 10-page document. If you were to turn it into a printed document, take about maybe 20-30 minutes to absorb the entirety of the material here. So it has a particular structure that we would replicate from topic to topic. So we have a vision in terms of where the technology is going to be. We have the technology scope for the particular topic. And as you can see here, we're just replicating some of the material from the original roadmap. And then you get into the applications, a bit of a write-up on each application. So short, sharp, with the main trends, the main issues that are being faced. But also then we're diving down into a table with the technology needs and challenges. And of course, you can click through, and I will do so in a few minutes, to the various items there for further additional detail. Similarly, if we come down to, for example, the product segment areas, again, you have the different product segments, a bit of a write-up on each one. And again, you have tables listing the technology drivers, the technology needs for each of those technology spaces. So that gives you a top level view on the particular topic at hand, in this case, power conversion electronics. But if you go back and have a look at this in a little bit more detail, each individual element, each individual section actually can be broken down further. So let's say if we have a look at the AC/DC front-end power supplies, underneath that, as given in the overview table, we have the technology drivers, and we had a list of technology needs. So each of these is an element now in a database. So for example, if we have a look at one of these, this is for the power factor correction um, in the front end. And this is a of the power supplies here. So a little bit of a write up here in terms of what are the issues and the trends. Also, we have tagging for each element here, what type it is, what applications does it apply to, where does it sit in the overall hierarchy. And I'll come back to that element in a minute. Of course, you can show more than just plain text. There's no reason why you can't look at, for example, you could have tables. Um, Also, you can certainly have a graphical view in terms of plotting out key trends projected forward in time. Remember, this was in 2019, so we're looking at historical and future trends on these parameters of power efficiency. So you can have various forms of content here under each of these elements. Now, so as well as the overview, then you have this set of elements. Now, that set of elements, there's a lot of power inherent behind those. And as you build up the material over time, you end up with a fairly large mess of information. There we go. So this is just a mind map. Not particularly useful, this. However, it gets interesting when you want to ask different questions of the roadmap than covered in the original overview. And if you remember those tags, we can actually search by those tags. So let's say what you really wanted to see was everything related to the medical application. So we can search by application, medical domain, and now you've got all of those elements listed in that database with something to do with the medical side of things. If you go down the generic topic node of medical devices itself, you can pick out, for example, the market drivers, decreasing load on primary healthcare and hospital systems by supporting home healthcare solutions. That's clearly a major driver for healthcare that electronics can deliver on. Is something which is generic to the entire electronics industry, but really, and that's why it's held in under this medical devices node. However, if you wanted those items which are related to the medical domain, which are specific to power conversion electronics, you can just have a look down through the power conversions node. And again, you've got a list of technology needs and challenges. So, for example, there's a key challenge there: reduce the size, improve the power efficiency to maximize medical device portability. Clearly a driver for power converters, AC to DC power converters for medical devices. So that's a specific one for this item here. So this gives us a different way of looking at roadmaps as we go forward. It allows us to ask different questions and creating a narrative, creating a perspective specific to the needs of the actual end user of the roadmap. Okay. I'm going to just make one comment quickly about how this material is created. You may remember I referred to the fact that we pulled out some of the generic drivers from that original chapter write-up for the different market domains. So for example, we were talking about medical devices there earlier on. I pulled it out here. Here are the market drivers we were talking about a few minutes ago. The benefit of this approach is that a team who works on the medical devices topic can exploit and use material provided by other teams. So this came from the power conversion electronics team, right? these pieces and these write-ups. But when the domain experts in the medical devices space can come along then and then take that material, they can amend it, build on it, adapt it, uh, bring it into their overall story that they want to tell, and the content they want to put up on it. So the platform, therefore, these kind of online platforms, um, they don't get rid of the need for teams to talk to each other, right? For the application domains to talk to the technology domain teams, but it does allow them to share information in a much more productive manner inside this kind of structured database setup. Okay, so there you have it. In terms of a quick look at what we're trying to achieve here by way of the iNEMI roadmap. So just to recap very briefly, we've got an example of online material summarized with a very concise overview, supported or underpinned by a large amount of data in a structured database type setup, and with that ability then to search across that database. And that then should allow us to create a much more powerful tool going forward for the presentation of these roadmaps. And certainly the aim here is to try and create something that you can extract out insights, high-level insights into relatively quickly and easily. I should note that the demo that you've just seen, it works well in terms of showing the output. In terms of the way teams collaborate together, it doesn't have all the features and facilities we need, particularly around workflows. And the other aspect that we have to work on is that of visualization. The mind maps are good, but I'd like to go a lot further in terms of seeing how do we present data more visually from roadmaps. So this is just the start, what you see here. We have to invest time working on new platforms going forward to support the ongoing development here. So let me talk then about future plans. And essentially, this is the plan for 2022 for the iNEMI roadmap and the implementation of the strategy we've just seen here earlier. The left-hand side there lists, of course, the demo, which you've just seen. And that, of course, is based on old material, the 2019 roadmap. Going forward, then we want to move into a number of pilot topics. Now, what's the difference between the demo and the pilot topics? Well, the demo is based off old material, and its objective was to show what the output looked like and get feedback on that. The pilots, we want to create new material. We want to create refresh material for the roadmap. And we also want to start trialing and testing out how the teams create this new content. So for these areas, we have a number of teams that we're in discussions with. And essentially, there's two criteria that we have at the moment for a topic to be a pilot topic. One, it should have some current relevancy of some importance today at the moment, because we want to be able to, at the end, take the output and actually create some level of impression in the ecosystem. And two, we need to have fairly well-formed teams already for these. So the three that we're in discussions around at the moment are around 5G materials test and packaging, smart manufacturing, and flexible hybrid electronics. And I would be hopeful that at least two out of those three would go forward to be part of this pilot program. That'll be Q1, Q2 this year. Then moving into Q2, Q3, we will then be getting into the more mainstream development of the iNEMI roadmap. And essentially for that initial wave of priority topics, the center section there on the slide. We have some topics which are of critical importance from an iNEMI perspective, since in many cases either these are hot topic items or are areas where the iNEMI roadmap really differentiates itself from some of the other technology roadmaps out there. And a fair question is, what is the difference between the iNEMI roadmap and others? Well, there's a couple of key points. One is the iNEMI roadmap is heavily focused on electronics manufacturing and the realization of electronics technologies. So in terms of the design, manufacturability, and in-field deployment. And therefore, it tends to have a slightly shorter time horizon compared to some of the other roadmaps out there. It has a time horizon out that goes out to about 10 years, with a focus, I would say, a lot of the material is about the 3 to 5 year mark. But most of the material we have generally stops around about the 10-year mark in terms of how it looks forward in time. You can also see that it focuses on many of the key assembly and implementation fabrics for electronics at a higher level, in the areas of board assembly, printed circuit boards, but we also have major cross-cutting topics there in the list: sustainable electronics, supply chain resiliency, and a few other items there, such as mass data storage. So these are topics which are core and central to a lot of the work that iNEMI does. And we do know that in these cases, we feel confident about pulling together teams relatively quickly in these spaces. One challenge that we face is that technology topic teams generally want to have a good view of what the application drivers are going to be when they're trying to get into their discussions about where a particular technology is going to go. Traditionally, what iNEMI used to do was to have a number of application area topics working slightly ahead of the technology topics. That process ran into difficulties because delayed outputs from the application areas would slow things down on the priority topics. So what we're going to do this time around is we're going to have a task force to take a high level view of some of the application domains to try and provide some input, at least, to inform the conversations around the priority topic technologies. And hence this comment here around the support from a product emulator task force there. So that's something we have to set up over the next couple of months. When we get into the back end of the year, then we will be moving into a further wave of topics, many of which are actually, just because they're being delayed towards later in the year doesn't mean they're not important. Actually, some of them are absolutely critical to iNEMI. You have a look at the list there, from semiconductors all the way through to thermal management. The reason why many of these topics have been delayed, pushed out a little bit further, is either A, we believe we need to do more work on creating the teams, or B, there is a lot of material available from other technology roadmaps. And I'm thinking in particular the likes of HIR for heterogeneous integration, or IRDS for semiconductor technology. And we're already in discussions with the teams behind those roadmaps to try and figure out how we're going to interconnect with them. We've had a method of working with some of these in the past. For example, you saw the PSMA folks provided us with a power conversion and electronics chapter. We just need to figure out exactly how we're going to do that. Now, the good news is with an online HTML-based content, it's very easy to link across to other roadmaps, but you still need to have some discussion and agreement with them as to how we would go about doing that. Anyway, that's material for the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. I would say However, even if the topics that are of interest to you personally are towards the back end of this process, I would encourage you to flag up your interest at this stage, and I will be sharing an expression of interest form towards the end of this session. Okay, so let's just one comment around some of the work that we need to do on our side to make sure that this whole process is successful. And by our side, I mean here the iNEMI staff and team inside the initiative. We need to support the formation of the teams, and of course, the selection of the IT platform. As I said, the Nuclino platform is not the one we will be going forward with. Basically, once we have the platform selected, and part of the selection procedure has to address this, we have to ensure that it is relatively easy for the teams to be able to adapt, learn, and get to use that platform. It's no use having a platform with a lot of facilities and capabilities, only to find that the learning curve is too much for people who are pretty short on time generally. So we need to make that process as easy and as seamless as possible. The other area, which I've already alluded to, is the idea of improved visualization for roadmaps. I believe that's something that we need to look at early in the process rather than later on. And so we'll be doing some work on that as well. So these are the kind of things we're going to try and do to support the process. Now, I just want to outline a little bit the overall way things are, individual topics are going to develop over the coming years, so you get a sense of the order in which things happen. We will start with the recruitment of topic leads, and then working with them, we will help recruit and form the teams of potential contributors and bring them on board into the overall process. So there'll be supports for that. Then you get into the actual process of creating the content. And that begins with bringing teams together to agree the technology scope, the primary drivers for the technology areas, before diving down then into the detail of identifying the technology needs, the technology capabilities, and then the gaps between those two as we go forward. Before then, we finally get around to the editing sections, doing a bit of analysis and drawing out conclusions and recommendations from the roadmap, and then they bring the whole thing online through the publication means we were talking about earlier on. Now, what we're doing is to support this process, we're lining up a number of resources for initial recruitment purposes and for trying to get the word out into the ecosystem as broadly as possible. And then we will be supplying materials as well for helping team leads on board their respective teams in terms of giving them the background and necessarily briefing as to what technology mapping is about and what are what's the code of conduct, what are the boundary conditions in terms of the way we operate. Then in terms of getting people together, we will be supporting a few workshops face to face, but also we've amassed a bit of experience over the past year in terms of how online brainstorming sessions can be run. So we will bring that experience to bear again in getting people together. In terms of gathering then the content and information, we will be providing templates to keep the conversations focused and to gather the exact material that is required. We have quite a few of those lined up. And then we come back to the underlying platform for the editing and storing of this and the data visualization. In terms of where we are today, we have material there for 1, 2, and 3 on that list. That's already available and nearly mature and ready to go. So we have enough for the pilot topic teams to get going and get started. That's not an issue, and that gives us room then to, in parallel, to develop, to select and develop the online platform for the main wave when we scale up the activities, getting into that second wave of priority topics. Okay, I want to just change pace for a second, and to finish up, I want to step back and look at why we're doing this. Because if people are to engage, I think the context in which they do work, provide contributions, needs to be some discussion around that. And essentially, one question could be very easily asked: why should we be refreshing the iNEMI roadmap at this point in time? And the interesting thing is, I believe that now is actually quite an important time for technology roadmaps. Um, the original genesis of a lot of the ones that are known, particularly in the English-speaking world, uh, was in the 1990s in the US, where they were trying to address the competitive position of the US industry. So that's where ITRS, the big semiconductor roadmap, came out of. iNEMI had its genesis around that time as well. And those roadmaps then went global and international in scope in terms of their perspectives and their contributors. But the question I think has to be asked in the last 10 years or so, are they quite as effective as they once had been? But I think a number of things are changing at the moment out there in the world in which electronics manufacturing exists. For starters, the application domains are proliferating. Um, Electronics is now playing more a crucial role in more and more areas of our lives going forward, whether that be in terms of medical devices for home care, whether it be in terms of the electrification of vehicles, whether it be in terms of the Internet of Things instrumenting our factories going forward, which means we've got a bigger variety in terms of the requirements of electronics. At the same time, then the systems that are being created to support those are getting more and more complex, um, both from a hardware standpoint and a software standpoint. So how they come together is becoming something which is harder to get your arms around. And even if you just focus in on the hardware technologies, uh, there's no longer that clear-cut division between chips, devices, and boards. With the advent of heterogeneous integration, that those lines between the device and the circuit boards actually is now being blurred by a range of different fabrics, whether you're talking about interposers, whether you're talking about socks or modules, you know, that world is blurring, and the choice and range of technologies is actually still increasing dramatically and varies greatly from application domain to application domain. And supporting all of that, then you have a number of different governments are actually getting more active in terms of investing into their own local ecosystems to draw in parts of the overall supply chain. Um, that means there's an awful lot more, let's say, government investment by way of money and resources into these domains in various regions. Um, and then if you look at it from a company perspective, the supply chains in which we engage, they have stratified over the years into various layers. And I was trying to make a count of the number of layers in a typical electronic supply chain, and I was coming up around about 8 or so. And I suspect if you dig in deeper, you'll probably find it's deeper still, and there's multiple branches to those, depending whether you're looking at the design side, the tooling side, or the manufacturing, the device and system manufacturing side. So the complexity of the world in which our roadmaps uh, are being placed has actually got bigger. and it makes it much more difficult for individuals and individual companies to get a full and clear view of what's going on and where things are likely to go over the next number of years. And for that reason, now is actually an important time for the ecosystem to come around and update a lot of the roadmaps that are being worked on at the moment. So taking that background into account, we have road mapping then, as I say, trying to help us to navigate that gap between the technology needs and capabilities. It's only one tool, frankly, for the electronics industry to actually organize itself to deliver upon the societal and business needs that are being asked of it. But it is nonetheless a critically important tool, and it's a first step in the analysis that's needed. So then you come to, well, okay, what is it the roadmap actually can do? And as I stated up front, we're really looking to try and guide the investment decisions for R&D, to give information in terms of what technologies are needed and when and for which applications and for what requirements do they need to meet. That's one. And in terms of the kind of analysis that we do, where we look at the difference between where we believe the technology is going to be in a couple of years' time versus the actual demands that we expect of it, we're going to find in certain cases that there are gaps, and it is the function of the road mapping to try and identify those gaps, which hence is an important tool going back to the decision makers. But then you come down to the individual level, right? And who is engaging, a person who's an expert who's engaging to provide content and contribute to the discussions around the roadmap. What is it in it for them? And I would argue that the process itself is of immense value for anybody engaging in the roadmap generation. Um, Essentially, each individual topic will be a forum whereby subject matter experts from across the globe can get together and try and form some kind of consensus as to what the future looks like. That's immensely valuable, getting involved in those conversations, because it helps crystallize one's own thinking and gets to see the perspectives of others. But importantly, many of those topics will pull in people from various parts of the ecosystem, whether that be from material suppliers through to tooling, through to design and modeling, to those who have visibility into the end applications for the particular technology, and then the technology experts themselves. Bringing them together into the room brings a variety of perspectives around the problem and gives a whole ecosystem view. And that's something I think most individuals who engage learn an awful lot from. Now, it's all very well and good for us to say to an individual, come and be involved. One obvious question is, how do I convince my management that this is the right thing to do? So when you step up a level and look at it at a corporate standpoint, corporate viewpoint, there is a huge amount of value in engaging in these roadmaps, particularly for small to medium enterprises, small to medium companies. It is getting more and more challenging to have in-house a full view of where the ecosystem is going. So it provides, engaging in the road mapping process allows one to bring back into the company technology strategy a broader perspective, a validated perspective on where things are going to be over the next number of years. It won't necessarily be a bleeding edge technology view. The consensus discussion tends to head towards something which is more like a fast follower viewpoint. So companies still have to work out where their own differentiation, where they intend to lead in a particular technology. But at least it gives a baseline. Engaging in the creation of the likes of the iNEMI roadmap provides a baseline for those discussions internally in the company. The other angle on it, though, is an outward looking one. It is, even for large companies, these days it is next to impossible to shape the entirety of the supply chain. You can get one level down into the supply chain. When you get down to 2 or 3 levels down into the supply chain, it gets harder and harder to actually try and provide the guidance to suppliers two, three levels down, to have the right technologies lined up at the right time, so the immediate frontline suppliers actually have what you need. So by getting involved in this conversation, getting involved in shaping the roadmap, a company has a chance to provide its input, its perspectives into how the material, as to how the technologies will actually evolve over time. And if you consider, iNEMI's focus, which is on the manufacturing side of things, on the key aspects of productizing technologies, um, the questions involved in terms of what the ecosystem looks like are actually critical to the future of a company, and therefore the value of the iNEMI roadmap is significant in that context. So if I've convinced you here that this is something worthwhile getting involved in, I would strongly encourage you to fill out the expression of interest form. I'm going to provide this link in the chat now in a minute. It's a quick form, just to indicate that you're willing to engage in the creation of the new version of the iNEMI roadmap. It asks which topics are of interest to you. And the information that you give us will be used to form an email mailing list for just regular updates as to where we stand on the iNEMI roadmap. But also we will pass on the information to topic leads, to the relevant topic leads, when they're trying to pull together their teams for their particular topic. So that's what we would do with the information that you provide to us on this form. But I would certainly strongly encourage, if you're interested in engaging going forward on this, please fill out this form. We do have a list of people who engaged in the 2019 roadmap, and certainly I will be reaching out to them again to encourage them to work with us on the new version. But we're reaching a break point here where we have to form up the new teams going forward for 2022. Going forward. So there you have it. Many thanks for your time and patience listening through this.